On the afternoon of January 15th, 1919, a 50-foot steel tank stands over Commercial Street in Boston's North End, holding 2.3 million gallons of raw molasses. None of the workers eating lunch in its shadow know that this tank has never been tested with water. None of the firefighters playing cards nearby know that its steel walls are barely half as thick as they should be. At 12:30 in the afternoon, the tank begins to groan. Rivets shoot out like bullets. In less than a minute, a wave of molasses 25 feet high will move through these streets faster than a man can run. This is the story of how a tank nobody inspected killed 21 people with a wave of sugar. Visual, freeze-frame style transition. Black and white photo of the actual collapsed tank aftermath, then pull back to title card. Rewind 4 years. It's 1915, and the North End is one of the most crowded immigrant neighborhoods in America. Mostly Italian families packed into tenements along Commercial Street, within sight of the harbor. This is a working waterfront. Longshoremen, teamsters, firefighters of Engine Company 31, and city laborers move through these blocks every day. That year, a company called Purity Distilling, a subsidiary of United States Industrial Alcohol, or USIA, builds a giant steel tank at 529 Commercial Street. Its purpose: to store raw molasses shipped up from the Caribbean. Distilled, that molasses becomes industrial alcohol. And in 1915, industrial alcohol means one thing above all: munitions. World War I has created a desperate global demand for the alcohol used in explosives, and every gallon of molasses is worth money. So USIA needs the tank built fast, not carefully, fast. The company skips a step that today sounds unthinkable. Before filling a brand new 2.3 million gallon tank, engineers are supposed to fill it first with water to test the welds and rivets under pressure without risking a catastrophe if it fails. USIA never does this. They don't want to wait. Almost immediately, the tank leaks. Neighborhood children come with cups and pails to scoop the sweet overflow straight from the base of the tank. It should have been a warning. Instead, USIA's solution is simple. They paint the tank brown, not to fix the leaks, to hide them. That single decision, paint instead of repair, will matter more than anyone in 1915 could imagine. For 4 years, the tank holds. Workers get used to the groaning sounds it makes when it's full. They call it normal. Nobody stops to ask why a brand new steel structure should groan at all. Here is what nobody in the North End knew. The tank's steel walls were dangerously thin. In some sections, barely half the thickness modern engineering would require for a structure holding that much weight and pressure. The design had no licensed engineer's calculations behind it. No architect signed off on it. The company's own treasurer, Arthur Gell, oversaw construction, a man with no engineering background at all. At this point, the flaw was fixable. A full inspection, a replating of the tank walls would have solved it. But that would have cost money and time USIA didn't want to spend. Then, on January 13th, 1919, 2 days before the disaster, a ship arrives from Cuba and pumps 600,000 fresh gallons of warm molasses into the tank. This raises the tank close to its absolute capacity for the first time in months. The molasses inside is now under more pressure than it has ever held. At this point, the disaster was still avoidable. But then the temperature changes everything. Boston in mid-January is typically bitterly cold. But on January 15th, the temperature swings dramatically from near 0 degrees Fahrenheit days earlier to an unseasonably warm 40 degrees. Warm molasses ferments. Fermentation produces gas. Gas needs somewhere to go. Inside a tank already stressed by thin steel, poor design, and a fresh, heavy load, rising internal pressure has nowhere left to escape. So, On that unusually warm Wednesday at 12:30 in the afternoon, something inside the tank finally gives. Witnesses later describe hearing a sound like machine gun fire. That's the rivets popping, one after another, down the seams of the tank. Then, a deep rumble, like a train passing overhead. There is one detail almost nobody knew at the time, one that investigators would only uncover years later. The specific chemical composition of the steel plates used to build this tank was unusually low in a key element, manganese, making the metal far more brittle in cold temperatures than the builders realized. On a warm day, under fresh pressure, that brittle steel had no give left in it at all. What happens in the next 90 seconds will become one of the strangest disasters in American history. 12:30 p.m., the tank's north side splits open entirely. 2.5 million gallons of molasses erupt outward, not as a slow ooze, but as a wave. Investigators later estimate the initial wave moved at nearly 35 miles per hour, standing 25 feet high at its peak. Molasses, something people picture as slow and thick, moving faster than a man can sprint. Remember, this entire neighborhood believed the tank groaning overhead was simply normal. In the span of a single breath, that assumption killed people. The wave shreds through everything in its path. It lifts a freight car off its tracks. It collapses a section of the Boston Elevated Railway. It crushes the Engine 31 firehouse, trapping firefighters inside as molasses pours through the windows. 12:31 p.m. Horses hitched to wagons are caught first, unable to run, sinking under the weight of the syrup as it hardens around them. Bystanders who try to help find themselves trapped too. The molasses acts almost like quicksand, and every movement makes it worse. Imagine standing on that sidewalk. One moment you're walking home for lunch. The next, a wall of brown syrup, taller than a house, is bearing down on you faster than you can turn around. By early afternoon, 21 people are dead, crushed, drowned, or suffocated in molasses. About 150 more are injured. Some victims aren't found for days, buried under the hardening syrup, but there is heroism here too. Sailors from the USS Nantucket docked nearby rush into the wreckage within minutes, wading through molasses up to their waists to pull survivors free. Firefighters, doctors, and ordinary neighbors work through the freezing afternoon and into the night, refusing to stop even as the syrup hardens around their boots. By evening, the flood has gone still, literally frozen into the winter air, entombing the North End in brown. What investigators find when they finally dig through that wreckage will upend everything the company claims happened. Visual. Newspaper front pages from January 1919. Headlines about the disaster. USIA company officials at press conferences. In the days after the flood, United States Industrial Alcohol has an explanation ready almost immediately. Anarchists. This isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. 1919 is a year of real anarchist bombings across the United States, part of what becomes known as the First Red Scare. USIA insists their tank was sabotaged, that a bomb, not their construction, caused the collapse. But the victims' families don't accept it. What follows is one of the largest class action lawsuits in Massachusetts history. 119 individual claims eventually consolidated into one case, overseen by a court-appointed auditor named Hugh Ogden. The hearings stretch on for nearly 6 years and call more than 3,000 witnesses. It becomes, at the time, the longest civil trial in state history. Here is the open question that drives the entire case. Was this an act of terrorism or an act of negligence? Engineers hired by the plaintiffs begin examining the physical evidence, twisted steel plates recovered from the wreckage. And what they find contradicts USIA's story completely. There is no evidence of an explosion, no blast pattern, no shrapnel signature consistent with a bomb. Instead, they find a tank built with steel far thinner than safety standards of the era required. Plates as thin as 9/16 of an inch in places that should have been much thicker to hold that volume of liquid. They find a design that was never reviewed by a licensed structural engineer. They find no record that the tank was ever tested with water before it was filled with molasses. And then comes the detail that changes everything. The one the seed was planted for, back at the very start of this story. Remember those neighborhood children collecting leaking molasses with cups years before the disaster? Remember the company's solution, paint, not repair? The auditor's investigation reveals that USIA had known this tank was flawed since almost the day it was built and chose cosmetics over correction every single time. In 1925, Auditor Ogden issues his final report. The tank collapsed due to structural failure, not sabotage. United States Industrial Alcohol is found liable. The company ultimately pays out roughly $600,000 in damages, equivalent to well over $10 million today. The bomb theory, pushed by the company for 6 years, dies completely. The real villain was never an anarchist in the shadows. It was a rushed construction schedule, a missing engineer's signature, and a coat of brown paint. The Boston Molasses flood did something almost no other disaster of its era managed to do. It changed how buildings get approved in America. In the case's aftermath, Massachusetts, and eventually much of the country, began requiring that construction plans for large structures be signed and certified by a licensed professional engineer, with calculations that could be independently checked. Structures like storage tanks would now need documented safety margins, calculated stress loads, and material specifications that couldn't simply be approved by a company treasurer with no technical training. It's one of the earliest American case studies directly linking a specific engineering failure to the birth of professional licensing standards that still govern construction today. Every time an engineer stamps a blueprint before a bridge, a tank, or a skyscraper is built, there's a thread connecting that requirement back to a Wednesday afternoon in the North End in 1919. Today, a small plaque near Langone Park, close to where the tank once stood, marks the site. Locals still repeat a piece of a neighborhood folklore that on hot summer days, if the wind is right, you can still smell molasses in the North End air. It's almost certainly not true in any literal sense. But it endures because some disasters leave a mark on a place that outlasts the physical wreckage entirely. 21 people died because a company chose paint over repair and speed over inspection. The wave that killed them moved at 35 miles per hour. The warning signs had been leaking, quite literally, for 4 years.